part 4 of our 28-day journey aboard the Silver Sea Silver Spirit. In part 4, we will stop for 2 days in Rouen, France, before stopping in Honfleur, France, and then continuing on to St. Peter Port on the Isle of Guernsey. After hugging the coast of France, we glided up the Seine River to our destination of Rouen, France. We passed by rolling fields of grains, happy cows, and hundreds of swans swimming in the Seine. We passed beautiful towns and villages on both banks of the river, and we had plenty of time for our morning workout, breakfast in La Terraza, and more sightseeing on the ever-changing River Seine. On the way into Rouen, we passed the Navigator of the Seas. We had time for a lecture on Rouen, delivered by one of our port and history lecturers, Dr. Pond.
The Romans were here for several centuries. In AD 48-41, the Vikings came and conquered some states. A peasant girl who believed that God had chosen her to lead France to victory in the 100 Years' War. She persuaded Charles VII of her high connections and led a French army to the besieged city of Orleans in 1429, where she achieved a great victory over the English and their French allies.
Continuing up the River Seine, we continued to enjoy the ever-changing view, and since we would not be arriving until about 1:30, we decided to have lunch at Seishin. Seishin is the Japanese-style restaurant on board the Silver Spirit, and while there is an upcharge for dinner, there is no upcharge for lunch, and lunch is mostly sushi, sashimi, and noodle bowls. More about Seishin and all of the other restaurants and venues on the Silver Spirit in our upcoming dining and drinking guide. Rouen is known as the city with 100 spires and is a city set on the banks of the River Seine in northwestern France. Rouen is about as French gets and sits only 77 miles from Paris, but delivers a very different vibe. For our excursion today, we chose Rouen Highlights, a Silver Sea included tour that should have taken us to the top of St. Catherine's Hill for a look over Rouen, but instead for some reason started with the town itself. By passing the lookout, we went directly to passing by shops and the Texas hamburger and hot dog restaurant to visit Notre Dame Cathedral of Rouen. Work started on this Gothic version of the cathedral in the late 12th century and was finished in partial form in the 13th century. The church stood with only 2 towers for several centuries, and then in the 16th century, the 3rd tower was constructed. The church has been hit by lightning, burned down by fires, and destroyed by bombings, but has been rebuilt each time bigger and grander than before. Today, as with all churches constructed that long ago, renovation and restoration is a continual and never-ending process. The cathedral is an enduring and monumental and beautiful structure that stands as a centerpiece of Rouen. Visit to the cathedral, rain was threatening, so we carried on into the bustling city center. There were so many people in the shopping streets that we soon became separated from our tour group. We just followed the first Silver Sea sign that we saw and continued on tour. Soon enough, it started raining so hard that we got separated from almost everybody, and the tour was rained out. We went back to the shuttle bus location and went back to the ship. Well, how was it? Well, as an included excursion, it didn't cost us anything, but it was kind of a waste of our time. The tour description was not accurate. We did not stop at St. Catherine's Hill for an overlook of the city. The allotted time might have been enough, but we wouldn't know because we didn't go to every place we were supposed to go. Our tour guide for the time we were with her was fine, but despite having the quiet box radios, we soon lost track of her. There was no food involved, so nothing to rate there. The overall experience, because of the poor tour description, missing of the first stop, and, of course, the rain, gave it sort of a lame feeling. And would I recommend it to a friend? Well, not likely. Not the way at least it was set up and implemented. Now, I certainly understand the effect weather played into this, and maybe they were just doing the best they could, but it didn't feel like it. And so we returned to the ship with the excursion feeling, well, incomplete and rather disappointed. Well, we drowned our sorrows with a pre-dinner drink and then headed upstairs to Spaccanapoli for dinner. There we took time for a picture with our chef for the day, enjoyed a pizza, and tried the calzone, which as it turns out was well worth the try. It was delicious. After dinner, we went upstairs to the Panorama Lounge to continue to drown our sorrows, and upon recommendation of a fellow cruiser, we tried a Midori margarita. In this delicious concoction, the Midori is substituted for the normal triple sec, making it much more mellow, interesting, and delicious. After spending a bit of time in the room, we moved to the Venetian Theatre to view the show tonight, a French troupe of local entertainers presenting the Can-Can in cabaret form.
Happy to see you live. Faut faire bien attention, c'est pas le moment de tomber. Et le plus important, c'est de partir du bon côté. On va lancer le Can-Can de 7h77 ans. Les petits enfants, les grands-mères vont tous lever la journée. And now, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands up and do the la, here we go. La, 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 la,
And with that interesting and certainly flamboyant presentation of the Can-Can and French cabaret music, it was time for bed and get ready for day 2 in Rouen. Bright and early the next morning, and we were up and at it, ready to go. We had booked what we thought would be an interesting excursion, charming Norman villages and castles. We passed through Rouen and into the charming and verdant Normandy countryside. We arrived about 1 hour later at our first goal, Chateau Cobh. Instead of releasing us to go explore the ruins, our tour guide wanted to give us a seemingly endless stream of information about the ruins spread out in front of us, and then told us we only had 20 minutes to view the castle from where we were. I saw the path, and I saw people down there, so we could have walked amongst the ruins as the tour information indicated we could do. But alas, there was no time. So we spent our time afar looking over the castle ruins and the village below. Soon, and it was time to get back on the bus and head for our next stop, which was to be the village, Lyons-la-Forêt. itself was indeed beautiful and very charming, full of gracefully decomposing buildings and half-timber houses. Today, we discovered they had their monthly street market, filled with tchotchkes, knickknacks, and even art pieces. But to me, the village itself was the star, and so we set out to explore. With a population of only around 730 people, the entire village is easily walkable in just a few minutes. Lyons-la-Forêt is recognized as one of France's most beautiful villages. And here is my quick tour and highlights reel. Tourism is the major industry. There are a couple of small hotels, several restaurants and bars, a pharmacy, and even what passes for a supermarket here. The market features fresh fruits and vegetables from local farmers, locally produced cheeses, and a good selection of wines. There is no meat market. However, one shows up on market days just outside the grocery store. With our time spent in the village, it was now time to return to the bus and back to the Silver Spirit. Well, how did we rate this tour? Well, I think the potential was high, but because we paid $109 per person and didn't do what I considered the main point of the trip, and that was to explore the ruins of a medieval castle, I can only rate it half a star. Perhaps it's just bitterness, but for the same reason, I rated half a star for the accuracy of the tour description. And while all the tour stops were made, I don't believe they were made in full. Was the time allotted enough? Well, certainly not at the castle. How was our tour guide? Not too good, to me, as she was constantly trying to pull our attention away from what we should have been exploring. In other words, she talked too much. There was no food involved, so nothing to rate there. And while the village was good, the castle experience was not. And would I recommend this excursion to a friend? Well, it's not likely the way it's set up now. Now, before you say, perhaps I doth protest too much, I'll have you know that soon after we arrived back at the ship, we received a message from the excursion team saying that the full price of the excursion was being refunded back into our account. And that wasn't just for us, it was for all guests who went on the excursion, and this was because of complaints from many of the other guests on that excursion. Upon arriving back at the ship, we did a quick lunch in La Terraza and then headed to the excursions desk to check the shuttle schedule. Back into Rouen we went to pick up where we left off after being rained out the day before. First stop was to check out the exterior of St. Elie, a Protestant temple built in the 13th century. Although it looks a bit worse for the wear and abandoned, it is not, and services are still held on Sundays as well as special events such as weddings and concerts. Moving back into the streets, we just wandered about, checking out the squares, the buildings, and the architecture. Catching another glimpse of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in the distance. Walking under the grand astrological clock, right next to Burger King, by the way. Admiring the architecture and the public buildings. Checking out what passes for normal. And admiring the macaroons. And the efforts of the graffiti artist. Where here, at least, they take their lives into their own hands by crawling out on ledges. Until we finally found what I was looking for, the modern Catholic Church of Joan of Arc, and the monument to her now located in the same spot she was burned at the stake on May 30th, 1431. After that somber reminder that good deeds seldom go unpunished, we headed back to the Silver Spirit. Went to the Arts Cafe and warmed ourselves with some nice hot chocolate to recover from this cold and blustery day. Hot chocolate and a bite of wonderful lemon cake, it was time for a bit more carousing about, and then off to bed. And although we weren't supposed to leave dock until 2:45 in the morning, my clock said we must have boarded everyone early and proceeded off at a crawl around 11 something. The captain timed it perfectly, however, and we rolled into Honfleur around 9 o'clock, the scheduled arrival time. But before we arrived, we had the morning to watch, once again as the countryside and tiny villages rolled by on the banks of the Seine. Passing under this bridge, we were right next door to Honfleur, our scheduled stop of the day. And once under that bridge, we were just minutes away from Honfleur at the mouth of the Canal des Orons. Off the ship and into the port, we met our tour guide and began our walking tour into Honfleur. It started in the port and industrial areas, full of graffiti, people learning how to drive in odd little cars, and bridges marked "Danger, no admittance." But we were getting close because off in the distance we could see the masts of ships in the harbor. Located in beautiful Normandy, where the Seine opens out into the Channel, Honfleur is a small city with a population of around 7,500 and is one of France's and the world's most spectacular and historic harbors. Crammed cheek to jowl with timber-framed houses and busy with ship traffic, the stunning waterfront simply begs to be painted. And it has been, many times. The waterfront beauty has been immortalized by artists like Monet, Cobh, and Honfleur's celebrated resident son, Baudin, to name only a few. And Honfleur has a direct connection to North American history. Samuel de Champlain, the founder of Quebec, launched from these waters. Nearby and stretching out across Normandy's coastline are the somber beaches of World War II's D-Day landings. More focused on tourism now than its historical harbor, Honfleur boasts amusement parks, many restaurants seemingly focused on, appropriately, seafood, bars, and shopping, all catering to the influx of tourists. And even a pub dedicated to an English night. Moving into the city center, we started to explore the little back alleyways, admiring the architecture, newish and old. Here's a restaurant and bar even Salvador Dali seems to recommend. But if you want the true flavor of Honfleur, you need to duck down one of these tiny streets like this one, the Avenue of the Butchers. Once lined with stalls like this, the butchers and fishmongers of Honfleur held court. This tiny street is St. Stephen's Church, now the Maritime Museum. This beautiful old parish church is in the Gothic style and dates back in part to the 14th and 15th centuries. It is the oldest church in the city and stands facing the Old Harbor. Please enjoy as we continue to explore Honfleur. Found our way out of the back streets of Honfleur and back to the harbor. The small town of Honfleur, with only about 7,500 residents, welcomes over 3.5 million visitors per year, of which about 50,000 of those are offloaded from cruise ships. At times, that makes it a little bit hard to move around the city. If you are feeling peckish, there are, of course, the many seafood restaurants, this wonderful looking pizza outlet, and chocolate. More chocolate. And even more chocolate. As As you wander about, most roads will eventually lead you to St. Catherine's Church. This is the separate bell tower set across the square from the church to limit the possibility of lightning strikes and fire. St. Catherine's is the largest wooden church in France and was built entirely by the shipbuilders of Honfleur. These artisans, called axemen, built the roof of the church the only way they knew how, and it looks like an inverted hull of a ship. The end result is quite striking and quite beautiful. The church was primarily built in the second half of the 15th century and still stands and operates today, holding regular services. We continued our walking tour of Honfleur before breaking away on our own and started our journey back toward the ship. Retracing our steps past amusement parks and nautically styled bird baths, harbors, and bridges, we made our way back to the Silver Spirit. Well, how would we rate this excursion of Honfleur? Well, value was high. It was an included excursion. The tour description was very accurate. All scheduled stops were made, and time allotted was, well, more than enough. Our tour guide was perfect. She knew when to speak up and when to keep quiet. There was no food involved unless you purchased it yourself. The overall experience was nearly perfect. And would I recommend this type of tour or excursion to a friend? Absolutely, I would. And with that, we return to the Silver Spirit as happy campers. Later that evening, after changing clothes for dinner, we ascended to the observation library for the in-transit cocktail reception. We were staying on for the next leg of the journey and were invited to this cocktail reception along with the other guests remaining on board after the changeover in Southampton. And once more that evening, we had dinner in La Terraza. And as usual, we had a very fine meal there. Check out our dining and drinking guide coming up soon, or more on La Terraza and all the other dining and drinking venues on the Silver Spirit. Now, we thought we were getting a special send-away as all these small craft came out to join us and started making noise and blowing horns and, well, partying and having a good old time. But we found out a bit later that this happens every night during the tourist season in Honfleur, as the small craft and pleasure boats of Honfleur sail into the estuary to watch the sunset. Oh well, I did feel special for just a second. And tonight at 9:30, there was a bit of a special event. It was supposed to be out on the pool deck, but it was a bit windy, so they moved Death by Chocolate, or in their words, the chocolate extravaganza, into Dolce Vita. We started with chocolate cocktails and then perused the tables of everything chocolate. Chocolate this, chocolate that, chocolate cakes, chocolate truffles, chocolate sculptures, eagles, ships, castles. But don't be breaking off a part of that castle, because there is no telling how long these sculptures have been around and how many times they've been used. But don't worry, there's plenty of other things to feast on. And after the chocolate extravaganza, we moved up to the Panorama Lounge for Rock the Boat, a high-energy performance presented by the Silver Sea Singers and Dancers. The music was great, and the event was a lot of fun. And then it was time for bed and get ready for the next morning. St. Peter Port in the Isle of Guernsey. We arrived at 7 a.m. in the morning and had to go through border security for a face-to-face with a UK immigration official. This was a tendered port, and so we hopped aboard to make our 9:30 Guernsey cliff hike excursion. This was a Silver Sea select excursion and cost us $109 per person. We were bused for a short distance, dropped off, and started our walk down a quiet country lane. Our tour guide had quite the sense of humor and told us a few stories of the island, engineering a few stops along the way to kind of give a few short breaks as we continued on our walk. Down quiet country lanes and past quaint houses, meandering by interesting vintage cars in the driveways, we continued toward the cliffs. Renoir had made his home in Guernsey for a while and completed 15 paintings. This frame represents his view for one of those paintings. Ever onward, we walked. And after walking a mile or so of suburban lanes, we made it to the trailhead, where we began our real ascent for the cliff walk. This public trail, beautifully bordered by the sea on one side and manicured private properties on the other, led us ever higher, affording glimpses of what was to come. These old-growth trees were simply stunning. As were the cliffside views as they began to appear. There was always something to be noticed on the trail, like this quirky little Buddhist altar. There was more stunning scenery and wildflowers galore. One of our group, a person of endless curiosity, found this beetle. We found out the wall we had been following belonged to a large property owned by the richest person on the island. The glimpses of the grounds that we saw were stunning. That's my group far ahead, and since I don't run anymore, I just try to walk a little faster than the slowest person in the group. These things were dotted along the roadway, and we were told that they were horse drinking troughs. We finally saw official recognition that we were on the right path and continued our ascent. Breaking out of the woods, we began our walk along the cliff line. This being a public trail, there were several spots along the way where you could stop and catch your breath or just admire the view. Looking back, it was interesting to note that the foliage had formed a portal through which we had walked. Hidden coves with beaches presented themselves. There's supposed to be a way down to that, but I had neither the time nor the energy to do that. Evidence of civilization began to reassert itself. Eventually, we found our way back to an area vaguely residential and with an actual roadway. And here was the end point of our cliff hike, the Hotel Gijon. It was here that we were supposed to experience Guernsey cream tea and English scones. Now, I've never really understood the English fascination with scones. I don't find them very good, but in the spirit of international relations, I determined to try them once more. Well, I'm happy I did. These things were wonderful. Creamy, buttery, moist and crumbly, a little clotted cream, and I was in heaven. Okay, scone lovers everywhere, unite. Well, after our dining experience there, we went back outside and found the World War II occupation trail. Guernsey was occupied by the Germans in World War II, and here we are standing on top of an old German gun emplacement. This is looking out over the channel towards England. And so the story goes that the Germans assigned to Guernsey considered it a vacation. Guernsey is a British Crown dependency, and during World War II, a conscious decision was made, as long as the Germans weren't really mistreating the population, to leave Guernsey alone. So the Germans basically sat in their bunkers and did nothing. You can see our ship setting out there, and a new ship has joined her in harbor. I decided to walk down the few steep steps in search of the bunker, and found it about 50 feet below the gun emplacement. There's not really much to see, but as a part of history, the bunkers remain, along with the story of the German occupation. Was going to be a few minutes late, so our guide offered to take us down the road a little bit and show us some more bunkers. There was also some residence here. This is Windy Cliff, Belvedere, and others, with plenty of wildflowers and plantings to admire. We finally made it to the bunker area. Look high and right. Or here's a better shot. The bunkers remain nestled into the hillside as historical reminders of what happened during World War II. The bus is here. Time to get back on and go back to the ship for another excursion. Well, how did we rate this one? We thought the value was good because it was an excellent excursion. The accuracy of the tour description was perfect. All scheduled stops were made and then some. The time allotted was enough. Our tour guide was amazing, full of good information and never too pushy or grandstanding, giving us the time we needed in the areas that we needed it. There was food, and even though it was only scones, they were very good scones. I'd have to say the overall experience was top-notch. And would I recommend this excursion to a friend? Yes, I would, absolutely. So this one was right at the top of the smiley meter. When we returned to St. Peter Port, we didn't have time to return to the ship. Instead, we found our tour guide for the next excursion, which was Castle Cornet and the Town Walk. After she had gathered our group, we all turned and walked to Castle Cornet just down the road. Now, I might have been a bit tired and cranky, but this tour guide was rather frustrating. She would walk for 15 to 20 steps, stop, gather the group, and start talking. Walk another 15 to 20 steps, stop, and start talking. Some of it connected with the castle, most of it not. So it took an interminable time to get to Castle Cornet. We did eventually make it, and she offered to lead us through the castle after a stop at the museum. Hearing that and extrapolating from the data I already had on her and the excursion thus far, after we got our 22-pound each tickets that were provided by her, we skipped the museum and went right into the castle on our own. I'm happy we did. The castle was neat, and we had it basically to ourselves the entire time. And after almost 45 minutes of exploring, I don't know if they were still locked up in the museum with her or not, but we were able to sneak by and head back into port on our own. So let's talk about the Castle Cornet and Town Walk excursion. Value-wise, even though it was an included excursion, I rate it low because it wasn't arranged to make it worth my time. Accuracy of the tour description? Well, I don't know. I left early. Were all the stops made? Well, once again, I don't know. I left early. Was the time allotted, 3 hours, enough? I don't see how it could be, but I don't know. I wasn't there. Our tour guide? She was pleasant enough, but her talking was rather garrulous. I have never met a tour guide that can't walk and talk at the same time. There was no food involved, so nothing to say there. The overall experience was pretty miserable, and would I recommend this excursion to a friend? That would be not likely. Leaving the castle, we decided to skip entering the town and had a pleasant walk back to the tender port. At the tender port, we were greeted by this. This line stretched from the front of the cruise terminal down to the tender docks. We started to panic. What the heck? How long was it going to take us to get back? Well, we were directed to the Silver Sea line, 3 people, by the way, and watched as the passengers from the P&O Ventura wound themselves around the line, making their way down to the tender. When that tender was full, all 3 of us were released to walk down the ramp to the Silver Sea tender, which we immediately boarded, and it departed with a total load of about 6 people. Passing by Castle Cornet, we headed toward the Silver Sea, Silver Spirit, passenger capacity 608, and looked across the bay at the P&O Ventura, passenger capacity 3,200. Back on board, and we changed for dinner, headed to Dolce Vita, and listened to Pianist Azulis in the near-empty Dolce Vita. We had to tell the canopy guy, sorry, no sell. He was rather dejected, but we were okay as she had a Bahama Mama and I had my bourbon old-fashioned. A little bit later that evening, we headed to Atlantide for dinner. It was quiet there and crew made a fuss over us, but please check out our complete dining and drink guide coming soon, or we'll talk about Atlantide and all of the other dining and drinking venues aboard the Silver Spirit. Night in a small departure, we decided to have the cheese plate for dessert, and I added a little cognac to the equation, and crew member extraordinaire Villani tried to ply me with bread, to which, of course, I had to say no. And with that, we were off to bed and en route to Southampton in the UK. Southampton would be the end of this segment and the beginning of the next. So thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Check out my much neglected website, tomsmultiinterest.com, and stay tuned for more as we continue our travels aboard the Silver Spirit from Lisbon to Copenhagen. Part 5 is on the way, where we will explore more of the UK before turning our sights towards Ireland and Scotland. Thank you for watching. Safe and happy travels from T's Cruise and Travel Muse.